Upon my honor, I do swear undying loyalty to the Emperor Titus Mede II, and unwavering obedience to the officers of his great empire. May those above judge me, and those below take me, if I fail in my duty. Long live the Emperor, long live the Empire.
What's going on, ladies and gentlemen? My name is Michael and welcome to FudgeMuppet. Today I'm here to bring you something we've all been waiting for and a video I've really enjoyed working on, a brand new modded Skyrim build. This big boy is one of those builds where the character has really fleshed out beliefs, motives and a role-playing concept, but even on the surface level it's just such a super fun build to play. Personally, I love playing a build that breaks expectations, and in this case we've got a Dunmer who was raised by refugees that fled Red Mountain, except instead of being a reclamations worshipper like one might expect, his parents converted to following the divines and he was raised among very Cyrodiilic influences. He fights with passion and purpose using a very offensive strategy of wearing down foes with area and floor-based fire damage before finishing them off with his rapidly swinging sharpened sword. He truly embraces his role as Dragonborn and will use dragon shouts to destabilize the battlefield, pushing clusters of enemy forces into one another and onto the ground which he has covered in fire. He loves the Empire, although he has a very individual opinion on what it should be, believing the true essence of its importance to be found in cosmopolitan values and of course the power of Akatosh. Surprisingly to some, he's not really worried too much about whether or not Talos should be a divine, but during the time of Skyrim he believes that the Empire is not being run as it should be. There's so much to say about this build and no reason to jam it all into the intro, so let's get strapped in for one sensational build. And remember that timestamps can be found in the description for any of those who want to navigate their own way to different sections of the video. Now let's start by talking about the mods that we're using. As usual, we're going to use the alternate start live another life mod to make sure we don't have to get captured by the Imperials alongside Ulfric and the Stormcloaks and get carted to Helgen. We'll be starting off this very Imperial playthrough with a fitting alternate start choice, taking our oath to the Empire. We're also going to be using the Imperious Races of Skyrim mod so that all of the races become more interesting in game and also so that we as a player character stand out even more. I mean, you're already going to feel quite distinguished and unique as a powerful dark elf fighting alongside Empire forces. It's not something you see often, but with Imperious Races this is going to be further enhanced. Then we've got the Andromeda Unique Standing Stones of Skyrim mod so that all the standing stones in the game are actually decent, and instead of there being clear winners and losers, every standing stone is redeemable and worthy of consideration. We'll get into our choice soon, but do know it's one we don't usually go with. We've then got the Ordinator Perks of Skyrim mod to really flesh out all the perks, which in turn changes our playstyle and allows us some more offensive specialization. This build will be using just 4 skills, but we'll be using a lot of perks within each tree. I think Destruction Magic is really taken to the next level with the Ordinator mod, and it honestly makes all the flames erupting from this Dunmer's palm all the more devastating. What's going to help add to this is our inclusion of the Apocalypse Magic of Skyrim mod. This adds a bunch of new spells to the game, which you can add to the arsenal of the pyromantic Imperator. Now for the armor, which looks absolutely awesome, you'll want the Immersive Armors mod, and then for the jewelry and the weapon, you're going to want the Oblivion Artifact Pack SE mod. The armor mod will add other armors to the game too, and the Artifact Pack mod will add more unique items into the world, along with the ones the Imperator will be using. As you can see, the Imperator is a Dunmer, so what does this mean for the build statistically? Well, you'll be joining the Legion with 95 health, 110 magicka and 95 stamina. You'll want to start shooting flames and get as fiery as you can as fast as you can. You'll have a health regeneration of 0.75% per second, 3.125% per second for magicka, and 4.75% for stamina regen. You'll have a carry weight of 275 and quite a few powers and gameplay effects to consider. The first comes from a passive called Whispers. This causes your ancestors to periodically mark an enemy humanoid to slay for plus 25 spirit favor and bonus gold. You can then use a point of this spirit favor to activate the ancestral guardian power. This gives you 75 points of armor for 120 seconds when you enter combat. While this is active, you'll actually have increased fire resistance. You see, with the Ashborn passive, Dunmer have a 25% resistance to fire, however, this is increased 25% further if your Ancestral Guardian Spirit Shield is being used. Furthermore, you can have an additional 25% stacked on top of all of this if the Whispers effect is active. Finally, you've got a power which you can use once per day called Spirit Walk. It allows you to expend some spirit favor that you've earned from slaying the targets marked by the Whispers effect to summon random invulnerable ancestors. This once a day power needs to be unlocked, although it's not too difficult. You simply need to slay 10 victims indicated by the Whispers effect. As for a standing stone, the Imperator will be using the Apprentice Stone. I really like this choice because it fits in with the vibe of how he learns magic in the backstory, which we'll get into soon. The Imperator is naturally talented as a mage, and as a result he benefits from the Prodigy passive. This makes all spells cost 15% less magicka, and novice spells cost no magicka at all. This means if you're really in trouble with low magicka, you can just keep using the Flame spell non-stop to wear down your enemies. Because the Flame spell is most powerful at low levels, the earlier you can get the Apprentice Stone, the better. The second passive you get under this stone is Sorcerer's Apprentice. Spells you cast are either 50% more effective or 50% less effective than intended. It might sound unreliable, but there's actually more chance the spells are 50% more effective than less, so it's definitely an advantage. It's also just fun for role-playing, as it can represent the nature of fighting on the battlefield. With so many things going on, sometimes one may feel overwhelmed or lack direct focus in combat, and in these times the Imperator might mess up and fail to cast a well-concentrated blast of magic. Most of the time, however, adrenaline surges through his blood, and in the heat of the moment he's able to conjure up a fierce heat of his own, doing more damage than most mages would with the same spell. Finally, there's an unlockable power called Vaporize. Once per day, lasting for 30 seconds, prevent a killing blow by annihilating the attacker. This has no effect on massive targets though. As for a stat spread, we're going with 40% health, 40% magicka, and 20% stamina. The armor this build uses is strong, but we're still going to have a 40% health investment to make sure we stay alive. Our armor will be smithed up and will also have that Ancestral Guardian power to protect us further. This all said, I just think that with a build like this, who is super offensive, using both hands to cause damage, not having the ability to block enemies means that a solid health dump is wise. In really tight spots though, this build can use shouts to push enemies back or send them spiraling into the air. Anyways, we've got 40% magicka for all the fire spells we'll be unleashing from our left hand. Because magic isn't our only weapon, we think 40% is definitely enough alongside your sword. Plus, novice spells are free, and all spells are 15% cheaper to cast due to the Apprentice Stone. We also have destruction perks which benefit us more. Furthermore, he wears the Amulet of Akatosh, which goes great with the role-playing, but it also gives him 25% more magicka regen. Then he has a ring called the Ring of Transmutation, which increases his total magicka by a massive 50 points and makes magicka regenerate an additional 10% faster. He also wears a very powerful circlet called the Circlet of Omnipotence. This grants him many advantages which are perfect for his skill set, but notable to the subject of his magicka, it makes destruction spells cost 30% less to cast. This is crazy advantageous. This build will have 20% stamina, which is more than enough for some power attacks and battlefield sprinting. With Ordinator perks, total stamina will affect power attack damage, but this build won't be weak by any means. He will have the other one-handed perks, and he's not meant to be played as a super frequent power attacker anyway. He'll use plenty of standard attacks with a super high DPS through using the Elemental Fury shout. His sword isn't enchanted, so this shout is perfect, allowing him to really swing at supernatural speeds. On top of this, the Circlet of Omnipotence has some other effects. One-handed attacks are made to do 20% more damage because of it, and our total stamina will be increased by 50 points, and stamina will regenerate 30% faster, and our carry capacity will be boosted by 25 points. It's a ridiculously powerful circlet, and it almost seems as if the Imperator was born to wear it. During your journey into Skyrim, the Imperator will arrive at 50 years old, which may sound a bit aged to any humans in the audience, but for a Dark Elf, he's still pretty fresh. You'll be playing as a character who has a lot of understanding of Dunmerry culture and tradition. However, do know that he is only a descendant of Morrowind-born elves, for he was actually born in Cheydinhal, a city located in eastern Cyrodiil. His birth took place in the 151st year of the Fourth Era, and he was part of the first generation in his bloodline to be born outside of his homeland. His family were refugees who had fled the billowing smokes and widespread destruction resulting from Red Mountain, heading to Cheydinhal due to its close proximity, and also because they knew it already had a bit of an established Dark Elf presence. His parents were raised in Morrowind, and leaving the disaster of Red Mountain and the abolishment of the Tribunal, they soon converted to following the Divines in Cheydinhal. They knew it would make life easier for their future children too, if they were more Cyrodiilic and followed the Divines. The Imperator's parents had it tough. Not only did they flee from Red Mountain and change their faith, they also faced the crisis with Umbriel early in the Fourth Era as Cheydinhal was sacked. They fled their new home and went into the surrounding villages with other refugees, and then came back and helped to rebuild Cheydinhal. The mother and father of the Imperator helped significantly with the rebuilding, which really helped to solidify their position as a family in the community. Their value as community members was also enhanced by their choice to follow the Divines. Later on, more Dunmer refugees would come to the city. Some would believe in the Reclamations, while others would convert to the Divines. Reclamations worshipping Dunmer ghetto areas would pop up, and tensions would form between the more Cyrodiilic citizens, including imperialized Dunmer, and the traditional Daedra worshipping Dark Elf groups. Raising the Imperator and his siblings to worship the Divines would help integrate them into the Cyrodiilic way of life, and this is more or less what happened. By the time he was born, the Imperator's parents owned a tavern in Cheydinhal that was very popular, especially with the other imperialized Dark Elf folk. The Imperator had a brother and sister, twins, who were born 10 years before him, who both played a significant role in raising him throughout his life. They were always there for him when his parents were too busy with work, and when he had a disagreement with one family member, there was almost always another that he could talk to, providing him both company and a source of advice. His sister was extremely compassionate. Although not being overly ambitious, she ended up working at the family tavern with his parents. She valued family and honest work, opting for a life of comfort and simplicity over the stress that ambition tends to assuredly bring. His brother, on the other hand, was quite a fiery individual, hyper-protective of his kin, and while he never went out looking for trouble, he was ready to become violent at any moment, given the need. He was highly determined, an elf with the same core values as his twin sister, but an entirely different personality. He aspired to become one of the most powerful mages in Eastern Cyrodiil, but he was in no rush, for he was aware of his Dunmer lifespan, and of course, the importance of strong foundations in the pursuit of arcane study. Whether it was genetics or the impact of spending much time with both his brother and sister, the Imperator ended up somewhere in between, considered by his parents to be a blend of their two other children. Due to this middle ground, there was nothing overly defining or peculiar about the Imperator in his early youth. He was kind, well-mannered, and a fast learner. He was always keen to try new things. He loved to read about history, religion, and how societies changed over time, and his brother even treated him like a sort of magical apprentice. Keep in mind that his brother was only 10 years older than him, so most of the magic he could actually teach the Imperator at a young age was very preliminary. As the Imperator became older, however, he eventually carved out more of a role in the family, and in some ways, more of an identity for himself as a person. You see, as he slowly received advice from his mother, brother, father, and sister, it slowly turned into more of a give and take relationship. They wouldn't just answer any questions he had and teach him about the world, they would also begin to tell him of their own challenges, particularly so regarding the disputes and quarrels they had amongst each other. This was the catalyst for the Imperator becoming quite a diplomat, not necessarily a master wordsmith, but rather an individual who was always looking to reconcile troubles. He quickly became the family member that people would go to when there was a fight or a clash in desires, and he was very good at not only finding a middle ground solution that everyone was happy with, but also at really putting people into the shoes of their opposition, making them feel the emotions behind the other person's particular opinion or wish. This came naturally to the Imperator, and if he felt like he made a difference to the lives of those around him, he was happy. Naturally, the Imperator decided to become a guard in Cheydinhal, taking his talent for resolving issues from his family to the entire city. He was only 18, and he liked the routine of things, having set hours, being able to clock off not just physically but also mentally when his shifts were over. This gave him time to read, which he loved, and being older, he was able to use this time to develop his own opinions regarding the society he lived in and the various macro factions of Tamriel, such as the Empire and the Old Miri Dominion. The Imperator Imperator, while living in a Dark Elf family who followed the Divines, still had contact with more distant relatives who worshipped the Reclamations. As they were family, the tensions were not so high between his immediate family and his relatives, and while the Imperator felt strongly about the Divines, he definitely wasn't anti-Daedra, nor were his parents or siblings. When he hit the books, he loved to learn more about the Dark Elf religions he wasn't raised with, and he could definitely appreciate all the history of his people and their beliefs. That said, his real joy was reading about Akatosh and the Empire. He especially enjoyed reading about Tiber Septim's empire, really admiring the cosmopolitan ideals within it, something still reflected in the demographic of Cyrodiilic cities. Akatosh was his favorite divine, for he was responsible for forging the covenant with the new empire of humanity, giving the Amulet of Kings as his primary token of patronage, and joining his blood with Alesia and her heirs. Without his intervention, it is likely that Cyrodiil would still be an alien society of oppression. The Empire had since gone on to do great things throughout the eras, and he was proud to live under its banner. Being a guard in Cheydinhal at a very young age, the Imperator quickly became exposed to the harsh realities of his city: criminal gangs, thievery, alcohol, and illegal substance abuse as a result of personal tragedies, and poverty too. Poverty was especially rife in the Dunmer ghettos. What the Imperator lost in innocence, he gained in maturity, and he quite enjoyed the discipline that was forced on him through training. He had quickly discovered that helping people on the streets was not nearly as easy as solving problems at home, and it was far more dangerous. That said, he was doing well for a guard who had only just begun serving, although this was short-lived, for when he was only 20 years old, the Great War broke out. The Imperator was enlisted to fight in what would be his first significant battle experience, and he was not fighting in the Imperial Legion, but rather as a part of Cheydinhal's militia. Within the city walls, he was trained to wield a sword, and while the town captain of the guard knew he had been learning pieces of destruction magic throughout his life, he was forbidden from using it on guard duty. The Cheydinhal guard didn't want a new member to be seen flinging fireballs around, so being talented with a blade was crucial. However, in the Great War, victory and survival was placed above all else, and the Imperator was given permission to use specific fire spells, ones that wouldn't cause collateral damage amongst their own forces. The Imperator fought through many skirmishes and lived, and after every battle he prayed to the Divines, grateful that he was able to command focus when he needed it most, and that his own life had not been taken. He also owed his survival largely to the competency of the others who fought alongside him, who were able to watch his back as well as their own. It was his participation in the Battle of the Red Ring that had the most impact on his mindset. General Jonna had led a garrison of mostly Nord soldiers to a rally point at Cheydinhal, and here the Imperator and other members of the militia were made to join these forces to form a coordinated attack. For 2 days, the Imperator fought with Jonna's men in an assault along Red Ring Road, the smell of blood and death becoming so familiar to his nostrils that it no longer irked him. It wasn't always, but on occasion, the Imperator would suddenly perform extremely well under pressure, impressing his own allies and striking fear into the hearts of the Aldmiri forces. He felt no need to brag about the slaughter, for he felt it was simply something that had to be done. He was constantly humble, and the alliance of his own comrades from Cheydinhal with Jonna's Nords truly inspired him. They all had such different pasts and cultural influences, but they all had the same goals and values, a shared vision. There was a beauty to their unification. Lord Narafin was defeated, and the combined forces of Jonna's group and the militia were successful in holding the road, despite the constant waves of Aldmiri reinforcements flowing from both Skingrad and Breville. Meanwhile, Titus II's forces were able to charge through the Imperial city, retaking the capital, ending the battle, and more or less destroying the main army of the Dominion in Cyrodiil. The battle itself had lasted for 5 days, and the Imperator only played a role in 2 of those days, but he felt that he had grown more in this time than the last 2 years of his life. After the Great War concluded and the White Gold Concordat was signed, the Imperator was sent back to Cheydinhal as a changed elf. He hadn't been practicing being a guard, but by the Divines was he good at it now. The diplomat nature of guard duty came naturally to him, and the parts that scared him before, like the danger and violence, were nothing compared to the atrocities he witnessed during the war. In his spare time, the Imperator continued to study culture, history, and religion. His experience of being in the Great War firsthand only strengthened his desire to learn more, especially about the Empire. It had really helped him to define his idea of what the Empire is, what it should become, and what's truly important. People everywhere were up in arms about the controversy of Talos worship, but the Imperator was actually not fazed for the most part. To him, Akatosh had more or less started the first empire. He had given the Dragonborn blessings in the first place, which allowed the greatness of the empire to exist, and whether or not there are 8 or 9 divines is not too important to him. He considers it semantics. As time goes by, the Imperator becomes a highly respected guard in Cheydinhal, and loved by most of the citizens for his ability to reconcile tensions between the different groups. With a family who raised him to follow the divines, and relatives who still worship Daedra, he was the perfect person to act as a bridge between both groups. He did not worship the Daedra, and he was very much pro-Aedra, but he still had a deep understanding and, very importantly, a genuine appreciation for both religious perspectives and cultural practices. He was that local good guy neighborhood guard. People respected his kindness and understanding, while simultaneously being aware that he could dominate them in combat also, if he wanted to. The Imperator felt fulfilled as a guard for years. However, the more he reflected on his experiences in the Great War, the more he desired something else. He felt a nagging void inside that kept on growing ever so slowly, and he knew he was destined to fulfill a larger potential. After much consideration, he decided to join the Imperial Legion, the army he once fought alongside. He wanted to see more of the world, but most importantly, he wanted to make more of a difference than a local guard possibly could. So after honing his maturity and skill set and reaching 50 odd years of age, the Imperator decided to join the Legion and was told to head to Skyrim. There he would be of more use, so off he went to Solitude, eager to make a difference to the people of Tamriel, to and for the Empire. Now for the role-playing rundown, much of which you'll have gathered from the backstory. Using the alternate start mod to join the Imperial Legion, we will begin at Solitude, ready to take the oath to the Empire. Even loving the Empire, the Imperator will still try to reconcile differences with other factions where he can. He's no silver tongue, but in an ideal world, he would remedy the differences between the Imperials and the Stormcloaks. However, as much as he looks for a diplomatic solution, he knows peace is not always a realistic outcome, and therefore he will find himself having to destroy the Stormcloaks to end the civil war. He's doing it for what he believes is the greater good. Upon discovering he is Dragonborn, he will have somewhat of a revelation, taking the prophecy as an indication that he is meant to be the next emperor. He has the dragon blood, and it was his fate to fight in the Great War, coming to the conclusions of what the empire should be. Akatosh has blessed him, and so he takes the beliefs he has developed to also be the wishes of Akatosh. That said, for the moment as it stands, he's not going to go against the Empire or the current Emperor. However, he will work his way through the ranks of the Legion, and becoming a hero in the Empire and in Skyrim as the Dragonborn, he would be ready to take the current Emperor's place if he were to be assassinated or something of that nature. He's not going to do the Dark Brotherhood questline though, of course. Through studying the Empire and the Emperors, the Imperator knows that being a Dragonborn is not necessarily genetic. Tiber Septim and Riemann Cyrodiil, for example, were more or less just picked by Akatosh, chosen to start an empire and be a protector of that vision. He considers that he might be the next chosen hero to start a new empire, but for now he will focus on strengthening the current one, for the entire faction is in a vulnerable position. Again, the Imperator does not care too much for the semantics of Talos. All he knows for certain is that Akatosh has birthed and protected the Empire forever, and therefore he is the most important of the Divines. As a result, this character loves Akatosh. The Imperator wants to build a diverse, broad-based empire similar to that of Tiber Septim's. He will feel great sympathy for the Dark Elf refugees in Windhelm, and while he does not dislike Daedra worship, he will not be pledging his allegiance to any specific Daedra. He may work with them temporarily for a benefit that can be used for his higher purpose, but he will always be very careful and never revere them. So he believes in religious freedom, but also has strong beliefs in his own religious preference. As far as factions and storylines go, you will obviously want to do the Civil War storyline, defeating the Stormcloaks and helping the Empire take control of Skyrim. If you wanted to roleplay being more diplomatic, you could focus on the main story first, honing your Dragonborn skills and attending the peace conference at High Hrothgar between Ulfric Stormcloak and General Tullius. You'll also want to join the College of Winterhold to really hone your destruction magic, going back to the foundations your brother taught you at a young age, which you built upon further during the Great War. Doing the Dawnguard DLC is also recommended. This build would definitely be anti-vampire and join the Dawnguard. The Dragonborn DLC is also a great option to further your Dovahkiin powers. And also it's interesting for this build specifically because you'll get more exposure to the reclamations worshipping Dunmer at Raven Rock, helping them out while representing the Empire and holding true to your love of Aedra and Akatosh. Finally, you could join the Companions Guild if you wish, but it's not necessary. If you do, you'll want to cure your werewolf form, as this build values purity and wouldn't want his soul belonging to Hircine. Your reason to join could be to further your skill with a sword and to have the Empire, through your presence, associated with one of Skyrim's most respected groups. As for the skills, the Imperator will be adventuring through Skyrim with one-handed destruction, smithing, and heavy armor. As I said in the mods section, the Ordinator overhaul will ensure these skills have some really fleshed out perk trees that help change up the gameplay and drastically enhance the Imperator's capabilities. Before we get into these perks, let's firstly talk about the spells and shouts you'll want to get your grey hands on. So spells is a pretty straightforward subject. You can use just about any fire spells that you like, and just for emergency situations, it's best to carry at least one shock and one frost spell too. Fire will be used 99% of the time though, and remember that while they're weak, novice spells should be utilized if you run out of magicka, because the Apprentice Stone makes them free to cast. One example from the Apocalypse magic mod is Unbound Fire. This unleashes a bolt of wildfire with the flames randomly jumping to the target or to the caster. Risky stuff. Flames is a very safe staple that you can spray out to wear down or finish off weakened targets, and as I said earlier, the faster you can get the Apprentice Stone, the more useful you will find this. As you'll often be fighting on the battlefield against Stormcloaks, you'll want spells that do area damage, so the vanilla adept fire spell, Fireball, is a sensational choice. Another strategic cast is called Belied, and it's from the Apocalypse magic mod. The thing with this fire spell is that it's actually a meteoric rock that heats up as it travels. This is really effective on a battlefield or fort takeover because you can often spot your enemies off in the distance, and that's when you should cast this, so that by the time it reaches them, it does the most damage possible. Also from the mod is the Incendiary Flame spell, which actually creates a molten stream as it passes near terrain, dealing fire damage over time to enemies. Similarly, you can strategically employ the vanilla spell Wall of Flames. This is also a good war spell because you can lay it in lines on a battlefield and damage waves of enemies as they travel through the fire, meeting your own forces and your own blade in an already weakened state. You can also let enemies travel through it, use the Unrelenting Force shout, and then have them run through it for a second time before you finish them off. I would definitely classify Wall of Flames as a main spell. Incinerate is also great for single target damage, perfect for boss battles. The problem with this one is that it has a decent casting cost and only hits one enemy at once, so make sure you're not just trigger happy with it. That said, still consider it a main weapon in your arsenal of arcane flames, and with all the perks from the Ordinator mod in the destruction skill tree, it can lead to more devastation than the base spell would in the vanilla game. Being up close and personal in the thick of battle, slashing enemies with your sword, you can also employ the modded expert spell called Scorching Hands. This blasts targets with fire damage in melee range, and I love this because it really reminds me of the Battlemage playstyle I'd use in Elder Scrolls IV Oblivion, where touch-based spells are commonplace. When it comes to dragon shouts, you can really use whatever you like, as the Imperator will really embrace his Dragonborn gift, but there are some specific ones worthy of your focus. Firstly, one that goes really well with the theme of this entire build is Fire Breath. It goes with your fire magic, and being the trademark attack of the most stereotypical dragon, it's perfect for this Akatosh-loving Dragonborn. Use this as you see fit, but with Unrelenting Force and the Cyclone Shout, use them to destabilize enemy forces, allowing your own Imperial forces to descend upon the staggered and fallen foes. Like I already said, you can also cover the floor in Wall of Flames and then use Cyclone or Unrelenting Force to push enemies into it. Finally, you'll want to use the Elemental Fury Shout as much as you can. We don't have an enchanted weapon, so being able to swing incredibly fast is going to send your DPS soaring further than the decapitated heads of your enemies. Now let's get into the perks. One-handed is absolutely crucial for any battle mage who wants to keep a spell in one hand and a melee weapon grasped firmly in the other. The Imperator will use his sword to wreak havoc on his burning foes, penetrating them with sharp metal that will heat up upon contact with the flames they're already drowning in. From the one-handed skill tree, we've got one-handed mastery 2 out of 2, furious strength, overrun, disciplined fighter, thundering blow, aftershock, clash of champions 3 out of 3, crosscut 2 out of 2, falling sword, wind swept, into the dust, judgment, and wandering warrior. Many of these perks increase damage or critical damage, and some reduce stamina costs or restore stamina or increase power attack damage dependent on stamina levels. However, let's focus on the perks that actually influence the playstyle and change up the gameplay. So this build isn't going to have crazy high stamina in his stat spread allocation, and will tend to use regular attacks a lot more than power attacks. However, he can still increase his power attack damage a lot with the crosscut perk. With both ranks, unblocked regular attacks with a sword will increase the damage of the Imperator's power attacks by 50% for 4 seconds. The beauty of this is that we're using the Elemental Fury Shout to rapidly dish out heaps of regular attacks, so we'll probably be scoring these unblocked hits non-stop, which you can then follow with a power attack if you like, which will also be quite fast due to the Elemental Fury Shout. With 3 ranks of Clash of Champions, all these sword strikes will also reduce our target's attack damage by 20% for 3 seconds. Now, while we won't be power attacking non-stop, we will have some tactical power attack options. For example, the Falling Sword perk will make targets bleed for 20 seconds when we strike them with a forwards power attack. When their health falls below 25% health and they're still bleeding, our attacks will become critical against them, dealing 10 times as much crit damage. Overrun grants us a one-handed sprinting power attack that deals up to 50% more damage and crit damage to a target above half health. The more health they have remaining, the more of both damage types you'll deal. With Wind Swept, your sideways power attacks with a sword will also fling targets backwards up to 6 feet, dealing up to 40% more damage based on distance traveled. Consider using this to send enemies back into a wall of flames you've placed on the battlefield. Thundering Blow also works sensationally with this build due to the Elemental Fury Shout speeding up attack output. So whenever you perform a total of 8 or more one-handed regular attacks in combat, your next one-handed power attack is a Thundering Blow that deals double damage and costs no stamina, resetting the counter. Then with Aftershock, your attack speed is increased by 75% after a Thundering Blow for 3 seconds. Pretty insane. Finally, Wandering Warrior will grant us 20% bonus damage to one-handed permanently. You'll have to work to this though, gaining a permanent plus 1% bonus whenever you defeat at least 4 humanoids and or animals in a single battle. Now let's talk about the smithing perks. They're nothing too exciting, and we've mostly just picked them so that we can craft and upgrade whatever we need to, so that it's as powerful as possible, which you'll hear all about in the gear section. The Imperator may have the skill set to dominate without the very best gear, but a wise soldier knows that it's always best to enter combat as optimized as possible. The smithing perks are Smithing Mastery 2 out of 2, Merrick Smithing 1 out of 2 picking Dwarven, Expert Smithing 1 out of 2 picking Hard Steel, Exotic Smithing 1 out of 2 picking Crystalline, Advanced Workshop, Recycle Materials, Sandstone Sheath, Fuel the Inferno, Heart of Creation, Smithing Specialization picking Heavy Armor, and Iron Law. Of note, we have Advanced Workshop, which allows the Imperator to upgrade 1 grindstone or workbench to an advanced version for 2,500 gold. Items can be improved 1 tier higher here and can be improved beyond Legendary. Fuel the Inferno builds upon this, letting you sacrifice a dragon's soul when activating an advanced grindstone or advanced workbench to improve items 1 tier further during that session. Heart of Creation is also interesting because it actually allows you to pour your dragon blood into the fire at 1 forge. When you forge an item here, it will increase your normal attack and critical attack damage by 15% and reduces attack damage taken by 15% for 1,800 seconds. 2 final notable smithing perks we have, which have effects outside of crafting, are Sandstone Sheath and Iron Law. With Sandstone Sheath, drawing your weapon automatically sharpens it, granting 25% extra attack damage for 10 seconds. You can do this once every 30 seconds if you wish. With Iron Law, we gain a bonus relating to our smithing specialization, which was Heavy Armor. So with Iron Law, the Imperator's attacks will ignore 15% of enemies' armor rating when it comes from them wearing heavy armor. Speaking of heavy armor, let's go over the heavy armor perks before diving into destruction. The Imperator may have a strong suit of battle armor, but unless he knows how to move in it, then he's not going to be too effective. His armor should feel like an extension of his body. He should feel mobile, unrestricted, and at one with the metal suit. From the heavy armor skill tree, you'll want to get heavy armor mastery 2 out of 2, battle weary, born to fight, cushioned 2 out of 2, heavy armor fit, face of death, defiance, revel in battle, bedrock, never kneel, out of the inferno, and immortal. These perks do things like reduce incoming damage and fall damage, and make your heavy armor lighter, slowing you down less. That said, let's talk about the more notable perks here. Face of death is a great one. This allows the Imperator to wear his circlet and still get the bonus of perks that require you to be wearing all heavy armor. Basically, if you're not wearing a helmet, these perks will still work, and your other heavy armor pieces have their armor rating increased by 20%. Defiance is also a neat pick. The Imperator is trained to deflect incoming attacks by moving in a special way in his armor, and because of this, whenever an enemy attacks you, you gain 15 points of armor rating for 10 seconds. Very importantly, this effect stacks. Then the Revel in Battle perk improves upon this. Whenever the Defiance effect occurs, your melee weapon damage will increase by 3% for 10 seconds. Most importantly, this effect also stacks as you'd hope. Often surrounded by fire, it's also fitting for the Imperator to have the perk called Out of the Inferno. With this perk, incoming fire, frost, and shock damage is reduced by 0.02% per point of armor. Finally, I think a good perk of note is Immortal. Whenever you're below 15% health, you're much harder to kill, taking 75% less damage from attacks. And finally, we have the Destruction skill tree. The Imperator knows much more of fire than what he uses to smith his gear in the forge. He is able to manipulate fire itself using the arcane talents he became familiar with at a young age. Fighting alongside the red flags of the Empire in your heavy Imperial Knight armor, nothing looks more epic than slicing through enemies in firestorms of your own making. From the Destruction skill tree, take Destruction Mastery 2 out of 2, Harsh Lesson, War of the Elements, Force of Nature, Elemental Specialization, picking fire of course, Combustion 2 out of 2, Scarring Burns, Conflagration, Flashfire, Scorched Earth, World in Flames, Outburst, and Cataclysm. These perks reduce casting costs, increase destruction magic damage, and really improve your fire spells. There's a huge focus on fire magic here, with perks like Scarring Burns reducing the fire resistance of your targets by 20% for 5 seconds when you hit them with a fire spell. With the Combustion perk, these fire spells will be up to 30% more powerful based on the target's missing health percentage. So let's talk about what perks are most notable here and how they specifically affect the Imperator. With Force of Nature, fire spells will cost 30% less to cast in sunlight, great for outdoor warfare. As I mentioned, this build covers the floor with the Wall of Flame spell, however this won't be the only way to do so. With the Conflagration perk, fire spells ignite the ground underneath their targets for 30 seconds. The Burning Ground deals 8 points of damage per second for 3 seconds on contact. The Scorched Earth perk is similar. Fire spells, not including concentration-based ones, actually can burn corpses to cinders. This then creates a pyre that burns for 30 seconds, with the Burning Ground dealing 50 points of damage per second for 5 seconds on contact. War of the Elements benefits from this, making the Imperator deal 40% more attack damage to targets that are taking damage from the Burning Ground created by Conflagration and Scorched Earth. But wait, there's more. With World in Flames, the Burning Ground created by Conflagration and Scorched Earth deals 25% more damage. Additionally, other fire spells are 25% more powerful against targets affected by Burning Ground. Flash Fire is also really powerful. With this perk, fire spells have a 15% chance to ignite the target for 2 seconds. The next instance of fire damage that hits an ignited target, except that from Burning Ground, detonates, dealing 100% more damage and causing a living target to flee the flames for 4 seconds. Then there's another fire-based perk called Outburst, which helps you in your hardest moments. When the Imperator falls below 75 points of health, a fiery energy deep within him explodes and ignites nearby enemies, dealing 30 points of fire damage per second for 4 seconds and applying the other fire spell perks that we have. This effect does have a 180 second cooldown though. And finally, we have Cataclysm, which you need 100 in destruction to unlock. Fire spells that hit targets affected by Burning Ground ground explode for 20% of their current health for a maximum of 250 damage, blasting them into the air and reducing magic resistance by 25% for 6 seconds. This effect has a 45-second cooldown. When it comes to the playstyle of the Imperator, things should be obvious by now. He's got fire to burn multiple foes at once, he's got a sword made rapid by his dragon shout to cut down enemies one by one, and he's got shouts and a sword technique to push back groups of targets, keeping them away from him and cooking in the flames that he's laid down. When entering battle, you may want to send out that spell called Belied, which heats up as it travels, doing more damage the further away enemies are. Make sure you use your elemental fury shout to get your sword swinging at supernatural speeds when the time is right, and start sending out area of effect spells early too, such as Fireball, to wear down clusters of enemies before they reach you, if you've got time, of course. Most importantly, whether it's using spells from Apocalypse to cover the floor in molten lava or just using the Wall of Flame spell, make sure you cast fire all over the estimated pathing of the enemies. If you've hit them with fire already, they'll be even weaker to these flames due to our perks, and then you can finish them off with more fire spells, causing the ground to ignite underneath them and causing burnt corpses to become burning pyres, which also cause damage. As enemies get close to you, feel free to blast them with unrelenting force or cyclone, sending them through the air and hopefully forcing them to move through all the fire around the place once more. You can also use these two shouts to send enemies off the top of forts during Civil War battles, killing foes just with fall damage. Feel free to then switch to any other fire destruction spells you like, such as Incinerate or the more advanced fire spells from Apocalypse Magic. These spells will deal more damage to the enemies already hurt by the burning ground caused by conflagration and the pyres made by scorched earth. Your sword will also do more damage to these targets burning as a result of the same two perks. Also keep in mind that if you're casting any high level fire spells in sunlight, the cost is 30% less due to the Force of Nature perk, which is a huge help. As opponents come to meet your blade, make sure you draw it within 10 seconds of meeting them to take advantage of the Sandstone Sheath perk, dishing out more damage. Deal out tons of regular attacks and then some thundering blows too. As I said, you can push enemies back into your flames yet again with a sideways power attack thanks to the Windswept perk, and if you want some more defense, remember you've got your racial power called Ancestral Guardian, which can be used to give you 75 more points of armor rating. The final thing to consider in the playstyle is what happens when you're going to die. Well, the Immortal perk means we'll be taking 75% less damage from attacks below 15% health. However, even then, some healing is always useful. Yes, you can just switch to dual casting the basic healing spell you start with, but it's a bit slow and this is not a restoration build. What I recommend is actually carrying potions that can be used to restore your health quickly in emergencies. You're not an alchemy character, so you don't craft them yourself necessarily, but you can still just buy them at stores or just find them commonly all around Skyrim and store them up. Alright, now for the gear. Besides the necklace, this all comes courtesy of two mods, the Immersive Armors mod and the Oblivion Artifact Pack SE mod. The weapon is called the Honor Blade of Coral and it's got some bite to it. This is from the Oblivion Artifact Pack, and to get it in your grasp, you'll need to head to a location literally called Small Cave, which can be found near Falkreath and Peak's Shade Tower. When you climb up and go in, you'll have to battle a ghost. You'll be able to get the Honor Blade of Coral, but it will be cursed. To remove the curse, you'll need to go to the Skyforge in Whiterun. You'll need a bunch of holy water, which can be found in barrels in most divine temples, 10 salt piles, 1 amulet of Kinnereth, and a potion of ultimate magicka. We've got the smithing perk to allow this too, and we'll want to smith up this sword to be as powerful as possible once you've removed the curse. It's a very nice looking blade, and for those who don't know, Coral is a city in Cyrodiil, so the weapon is somewhat reminiscent of the Imperator's birth province. Then from the Immersive Armors mod, we're going to be using the Imperial Knight Cuirass, Greaves, and Vambraces. This offers some really solid protection, and to get it you'll need to smith it, but first you'll want to reach the highest rank of the Imperial Legion. Smith this up to its max potential and enjoy the beautiful combination of feeling both dangerous and regal. Also, for all smithing, make sure you remember to use your advanced workshop and even sacrifice a dragon soul with the Fuel the Inferno perk to make things as powered up as you can. As far as jewelry goes, I already touched on this earlier, but I'll just repeat the effects and also tell you where to get the items. So firstly, there's the Amulet of Akatosh, more or less for role-playing. It makes magic magicka regenerate 25% faster though, which is still useful for the Imperator. You can find many of these as loot all over Skyrim, so it should be pretty easy to get. Then from the Oblivion Artifact Pack mod, we've got the Circlet of Omnipotence and the Ring of Transmutation. The Circlet increases your stamina by 50 points, stamina regenerates 30% faster, carrying capacity is increased by 25 points, destruction spells cost 30% less to cast, and one-handed attacks do 20% more damage. What a treasure of an item. Luckily for you, it's not too hard to obtain. Simply head to Mara's Eye Pond, and then go into a hatch into Mara's Eye Den. You can find it sitting atop a barrel here. Now with the Ring of Transmutation, you'll need to head to Silent Moon's camp, and go through the whole dungeon until reaching the room at the end with the ladder. Here the ring can be found inside a coin purse on a chest next to the ladder. The coin purse isn't searched like a chest though, you simply press it and the ring will be yours. The Ring of Transmutation is red, and it looks really cool for an Imperial Legate Battlemage. It boosts the Imperator's magic by 50 points and adds 10% more magicka regeneration. And that's everything you need to know about creating and playing the Imperator Loyalist Battlemage build. I really hope you enjoyed the theme and role-playing of this Empire supporting Dunmer, and I'd love to hear any feedback you have in the comments section below. As always, timestamps can be found in the description to help you navigate your way back through the build in case there are sections you want to go revisit to refresh your memory or increase your role-playing inspiration. Social media links are also below, so go follow us on Twitter if you want to. My name is Michael, thank you so much for tuning into FudgeMuppet, and I look forward to nerding out with you again very soon.